We are live and
we'll
recording.
All right, we will give everybody an opportunity to get to have the participant fill in as we begin. Give that a second.
Jeannie, will you also go over for our audience? The Q&A will be up. We also have enabled everybody to like something. Those questions will rise to the top.
Okay. And they can raise their hands also?
No.
They
just through
technically
Q&A?
can. We were hoping just to do Q&A tonight to keep the flow going. We'll definitely address questions going out through the Q&A process. And again, if people have similar questions, they can like that question and then it'll rise to the top.
Okay. Great, I will explain that. Okay, it looks like we've got our attendees having filled in here. Good evening, hi, and welcome to the West Sonoma County Union High School District Special Board Meeting, where tonight we are going to be discussing or ultimately listening to a group of presenters with regards to a feasibility study that was done in the spring that we actually had tried to get to everyone in April, and then COVID hit and everything got postponed. We actually had hoped to be able to eventually do this in public, but unfortunately, as we all know, that's not possible. So here we are. So welcome and thank you for attending. A couple of housekeeping items for each of you. Well, first, let's do our Pledge of Allegiance and then we can open the meeting. So as I normally say, let's look to the right, or if you have a flag in your room, find that, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Okay, so before we begin with our presenters, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. Tonight we're going to have 3 segments of our presenting happening, and after each segment there will be a 20-minute Q&A. At the bottom, or sometimes at the top of your screen, depending on what kind of computer you're using, you'll see the little Q&A button. When you click on the Q&A button, that allows you to type in text a question or a comment or whatever it is that you'd like to say. You can also, if you read through the questions when you're looking at them and you notice something that's exactly what you want to say, if you like it by clicking the like button, it will raise that question to the top of the list the more people that like a question. We will endeavor to get through as many questions as we can in the 20-minute segment. What this does is, because we have 3 segments that are probably each one is an hour, and then a 20-minute each of question and answer, we're looking at another hour. So we're looking at probably a 4-hour meeting here. We endeavored to try to not make this too long. Please also note that we will be having 2 more town hall style meetings, pretty much like this, but they'll be predominantly Q&A as well, for more, so we can get as many comments and as many questions from the public as possible. Please note that the board members will probably not be answering your questions or commenting on your questions, for the mere fact is that we are here to listen to the presentation, and then we're here to listen to you. And we are not making any decisions right now. This is merely a listening session for us and an opportunity for us to study the feasibility plans and to hear what our public has to say. So please be patient with us. You will also note that after I finish with my opening comments here, all of the board members and our student reps, our pictures will no longer be on the screen, and we will be muted. We will be present listening, but we wanted y'all to focus on the presenters and not on the board. So we will be in the background listening. I will come on after every segment to introduce the Q&A, and then I will disappear again. So I hope everything's clear. Jenny, did I cover everything? Tony, cover everything?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So with that, I'd like to ask the board members and the student reps to mute yourselves and to please shut off your video. And then we will begin with the presentation, and Tony Beal is going to start with the introduction. Thank you guys very much.
Sophia, can you queue up the presentation? Thank you. And we're good.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. And we could go on to the next one. So this is about the background. So why are we here? Why are we having this conversation? Oh, do we need to approve the agenda? Sorry.
Can I address one question that's come up, and it's kind of an important one?
Yep.
This meeting is open to the general public, but since we're a school district, we require everyone to authenticate their account. So you cannot join the meeting unless you are a Zoom client. Zoom accounts are free. We are not closing this meeting to anyone. It is so we can avoid Zoom bombing and control who attends our meetings. So to the person who wrote a comment in there, it is not closed to the public. It is open, but you have to have a Zoom account.
And is that easy to do, to create a Zoom account?
Yeah, it takes like 45 seconds.
Okay.
But that has been like that for all of our board meetings because we are open to people just joining our meetings because they're posted on the public. So it's easier for us to, I guess, what's the word? Toss people out of the meeting if they, and track down who they are if they do something inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So just a formality before I start talking again. Jeannie, we didn't actually approve the agenda. Do we need to do that? Is Jeannie there?
This is Diane. I would think we need to approve
Yes,
the agenda.
yes, we need to. Yes. So would all the trustees please come back in with your video, and we can please approve the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Diane. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, is there any comment or any thing anybody'd like to switch up, change, whatever? Everybody's cool? Okay, hearing no comment on that, I will do our roll call vote. Ted Walker?
Aye.
Diane Landry?
Aye.
Kelly Noe?
Aye.
Angie Lewis?
Aye.
Jeannie Fernandez? Aye. Jev Wise?
Aye.
There you are. Jeannie Broom?
Aye.
Satori McCullough?
Aye.
Thank you guys very much. Okay, now that we've approved our agenda, we will close back out and we will go to our no picture zone.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good to start your screen share again.
All right. So we can go to the why slide. So I think people are here tonight because we are presenting the West Sonoma County Union High School District Feasibility and Operations Feasibility Study. And the question comes up, why are we doing this? We are, I think most people know that the district is facing several challenging issues. The first of which is declining enrollment. So the district continues to experience declining enrollment in all of our schools. Since 2013, the district has lost 270 students. That's based on our district enrollment at second interim. Projections based on elementary partner district enrollment are that by 2022, The district enrollment will decline another 74 students. Our interdistrict enrollment is also declining. This year we had a reduction of 36 students. This is not unique to our school district. All school districts in Sonoma County are also experiencing declining enrollment. And especially in light of COVID and our recent fires, the county is experiencing additional people moving completely out of the county and out of the state. So one issue is our declining enrollment. A second issue that we've experienced in the last year has to do with program offerings. As our population continues to decline, the availability and our ability to offer a broad range of curriculum is reduced. So that's one challenge that we face. If we were to have a larger student population, we would be able to offer additional classes and support a broader variety of offerings for our students. The third issue that I think most people are aware of is that our district has budget challenges. And at this point, all districts are having budget challenges, but ours is a little unique. Over the past 10 years, our district budget has been qualified for 7 out of the 10 years. And a qualified budget, for those people who aren't familiar with that terminology, it means that the district can meet its financial obligation in the current year, but we're not able to do it in the 2 subsequent years. In the 3 years that the district budget was not qualified and was positive, it was due to the fact that we were using one-time funds to support ongoing costs, which then after the one-time funds were gone, placed the district in a more dire situation. Each year in the last 10 years, the Sonoma County Office of Education has advised the district that it needs to address the deficit spending and declining enrollment. As a result of that, the most recent cuts in the 18-19 school year were close to $1.2 million. And in our current school year, we made budget reductions of close to $1 million. This year, we met with the Sonoma County Office of Education, and they have again said that they are going to require the school district to develop a fiscal recovery plan to address a projected shortfall of approximately $2 million in the 22-23 school year. In 17-18, the district formed a budget advisory committee, and the job of that budget advisory committee was to identify big picture items that could help the district address the structural deficit. One of those items that was suggested was to investigate unifying with partner school districts in West Sonoma County. And I think some of you know that we are now pursuing that, and we requested that the Sonoma County Office of Education start that unification study. Another possible solution that was mentioned in the Budget Advisory Committee and what has been discussed in our district for several years is the possibility of consolidating our 2 comprehensive high schools onto one campus. The purpose of this study, this feasibility study, is to begin that conversation in our district. And so that is what we will begin speaking about tonight. So the agenda for tonight is really divided into 3 parts. The first section will talk about site feasibility options. If we can we move our whole entire student population onto either the El Molino or the Annalee campus? That'll be the first section. The second section will talk about workforce housing options. And I'll give you a little more introduction to that section when we get there, but it's looking at how we can, what it would take to use a vacant site and develop workforce housing options. The third section tonight is about legal options. What does all of this mean, and what are the processes that we would need to go through in order to make these things happen? So with that, I think we're going to start our first section. Jenny, did you want to introduce?
Yeah, I would like to introduce our presenters for this first section, which is Steve Kwok and Sophia Venard with Quattrochi Kwok Architects. They have been working with the district for many years on a multitude of projects. And when we first initially started the discussions about campuses, we engaged with them to help us with a study of what it would look like to put everybody onto one campus. And so tonight they'll be presenting those findings. And I just want to remind everyone, this is a 50,000 foot view of what we're looking at. There's still a lot that would need to be done to vet any of these options out. But this is the initial start of that conversation. So Steve and Sophia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. My name is Steve Kwok. As Jenny mentioned, we're with Quattrochi Kwok Architect. I'm the principal architect who is working with the district on this feasibility study. And Sophia Venard, who is also with us this evening, is the project architect for the project, and she'll be actually walking through each of the options. But I'd like to just give you a very quick overview of what we're going to be doing this evening. First, I do want to thank the board and Superintendent Beal for giving us this time this evening to present this to you. As Jenny and I think mentioned, we were actually prepared to do this right before COVID hit. And so we've been anxious to present this, and so we're glad to finally have some time this evening to do that. So as Superintendent Beal pointed out, what we're going to be doing is looking at placing all of the district students at each of the two current sites. So what that would look like at the Annalise site and what that would look like at the El Molino site. Plus, we have an option for looking at a completely new site. So not using either one of those, but what it would be to take a look at a brand new site for that as well. And we also wanted to be clear that we're going to be including in this study accommodating both the Laguna High School program and the district office. So making sure that we get all components of the district housed. Excuse me. So we'll be looking at 3 different levels of accommodation, if you will, at each of the sites. The very first level we're going to be looking at is really kind of a minimum capacity. What would it take to basically put students in every available seat in any particular site with adding as little additional space as possible. But this does not take into account any of the requirements for learning spaces, for classrooms and that sort of thing. It is simply just straight up capacity. Can we, what does it look like to get all of the students, which I believe is around 1,800 students, in a particular site. The second level is the minimum CDE recommendations. So following the Department of Education, that's what CDE is, for minimum standards for classroom facilities. And for example, making all of the classrooms, the standard classrooms, a 960 square foot classroom. That is essentially the Department of Education standard for classrooms. So making sure that we have those spaces throughout the campuses. For instance, Annalee has a large number of classrooms that actually don't meet that requirement. So this next level would be taking a look at what it would take to make sure that we get students in those minimum standards. And then the last level is essentially meeting the criteria for accommodating all of the district programs. So now you're taking a look at not only 960 square foot classrooms, but you're taking a look at larger art studios and science labs and CTE programs where you do begin to look at having those specialty classrooms. So basically the next level up of accommodation. So as Jenny pointed, this is the 50,000 foot level. This is not a design exercise, it's not even really a planning exercise. This is really more of a proof of concept. Can it be done kind of look at how we're going to do this. It's very diagrammatic. There's not a lot of detail to this. So we just, again, wanted to reinforce that. You're also going to see with this some costs associated with each of these level of accommodations at each of the sites. These are not really estimates. Rather than that, they're kind of rough order of magnitude costs in terms of, you know, using very rough dollar per square foot numbers that we typically see for this type of construction. And so I wouldn't put a lot of stock into the actual number, but what you'll find that's most useful about these numbers is the relative cost of the various levels of accommodation at each of the sites. That's really where these numbers are most useful. And again, we prepared this a while ago, and basically just as COVID was hitting, was emerging. And so the further caveat is we're not really sure how COVID is going to be affecting the cost of facilities and construction in the long run. There will certainly, no doubt, be some effects and some impacts on the design of facilities and priorities for facilities and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the background we wanted to give to you before we launched into this. And so with that, I'm going to hand this over to Sophia, and she will walk you through the various options at the sites.
So first, we're going to begin with, we're going to start with the Anna Lee High School, Laguna High School, and district office site. And this is the option one, which is what's the least we can do if all the students are together on one campus or on one site. And Anna Lee currently has 58 classrooms, and this is excluding ones that just need a lot of work, like the auto shop. And it also includes 3 special ed classrooms. And per the CEDE recommendation for the number of students, we need 57 classrooms, teaching spaces, and you can count the gym classes as teaching spaces. So it ends up being 55 classroom spaces plus the 3 special ed. And this is not including the Laguna High School. So we can actually, so all the students could be together in the Anna Lee High School with the existing classrooms, though the classrooms would be undersized, but there's enough space for them. So this option, the minimum option for the Anna Lee, Laguna, and district office site, it just looks at adding 1 portable, because the admin is quite small in Anna Lee. The option 2 is taking in consideration the space for all the classrooms, so that all the classrooms are the size that the size that CDE recommends. If you look at the legend, there's 5 colors. The gray is an existing building that isn't touched at all. The yellow is a light modernization, and the orange is a heavy modernization. In big picture, the heavy modernization moves walls within the building, while the light is more finishes, maybe the mechanical system, adding ventilation, but it's just a lot more of a simple, it's a fuzzy line between them. But for this high view, we just divided between both of them. And then the blue is a new building, and the white dashed is something that's been demolished. So in this level 2, the option 2 has exactly the same classroom count as option 1, the 58 classrooms. The difference is that all the classrooms that are too small in the main building of Anna Lee, the main building is modernized, so there's no undersized classrooms. And because of the modernization, and also the admin is too small, so that's demolished. You can see the little, I don't know if you can see the pointer. Can you see my pointer? Sometimes these presentations.
Yes, we can.
Okay, you can't see the pointer. So the admin is demolished, and there's, along with the auto shop, and in the northwest, there's a modular classroom building, and there's a new classroom admin building. And again, what is being demolished? What is, how, where what the new building is being put. This is just, can it be done? Can we fit all the classrooms? You know, with further study, this isn't necessarily, this is just, can it be done? That's the question. So there's a new building that is admin, and it has 9 new classrooms because of the classrooms lost, enlarging all the classrooms in the main building. The other thing that happens is it demolishes the 4 portables in Laguna High School that are from 1994, and it replaces it with a classroom building. The other difference between option 1 and option 2, option 1, we're trying to make the cost as little as possible, so everything is portables, while in option 2, it's site-built buildings. And again, the costs are approximate costs. They include the construction costs, and the soft costs are permits and surveys and design. So option 3, it's the district criteria. It takes into consideration all the programming needs of the district, all the CTE or dance class or band or any extra any programming needs of the district. And it also makes sure that like the science labs are larger than just the 960 requirement. So it takes all of the programming needs of the schools in consideration. And this, because of the programming needs, there's some loss and efficiency, and it's no longer 58 classrooms. It's 63 classrooms, of which 3 are special ed. Again, the main building is modernized and all the small classrooms. This is same as option 2, with the admin is demolished. And in this option, and again, this is just a 50,000 foot view. This East Science Building, the small classrooms are removed, and it's made 7 science labs. And all the portables are also removed in this option. And the main gym is modernized, as well as the 1940s Maker Lab and Arts classroom. The cafeteria is expanded for the extra students. And there is also a new 16 new, a classroom building with 16 new classrooms. And then the library is undersized, and there's a new admin and library, plus 4 more classrooms, and a new second gym. And the old gym and the old library are demolished. So again, though the classroom count is actually only 5 more than the previous options, but they're all the size for whatever the programming needs are. And on the Laguna campus, the MPR, now there's a new MPR. And then again, the 1994 portables are demolished and there's a new building. And then the district office is undersized for the district office. So there's a demolished and there's a new district office that instead of being 3,000 and something square feet, it's 4,000 square feet. So now moving on to the El Molino site. The El Molino site currently has 40 classrooms. That's not including the 1 classroom that's used for Sonoma County Library. I'm not including that. And it includes, and within that 40, there's 1 special ed. So again, this is the least expensive. How can we fit all the students in and all with portables instead of no site-built buildings? And it adds 32 new portables, of which 4 are the district office, 9 are Laguna High School, 18 are classrooms, including 2 special ed and portables, and there's 1 admin portable. And again, this is exactly the same classroom count as the option 1 of Annalee. It's again 58 classrooms, including 55 plus 3 special ed. Option 2 is now making all the classrooms 960 square feet. And also that they're not all portables, they're actual site-built buildings. So the district office, I'm sorry, the previous option 1 and option 2, both of them, the building K is demolished because building K is already slated for demolition. It's in terrible condition. So in both option 1 and option 2, building K is demolished. And this one, again, it modernizes the cafeteria to give enough space for all the students. It expands the admin. And then building I has some smaller classrooms. So it's modernized to remove the smaller classrooms. And there's also a smaller classroom in building J, which is just made into like a breakout room or office. And again, there's the Laguna High School, and there is the new buildings have 20 classrooms. But again, the classroom count's exactly the same as option 1. It's 58 classrooms. And then we move to option 3 for the El Molino site. And this one is the same classroom count as option 3 for the Annalee Laguna district office site. It's 63 classrooms. And again, it takes all the programming needs in consideration, you know, dance, art, maker space, all the programming needs. And in this version, building H, which is a modular building and it has a portable at the end, is also demolished because again, there was the option 3 was with no portables. And the building K again is demolished. And in this version, there, the cafeterias is modernized. Building F that hasn't been modernized since 1984 is modernized. The administration is expanded. The art has some undersized spaces. Again, it's modernized. The gym is modernized. And there is then there's a new building. There's 30 new classroom buildings, as well as the 5 new Laguna High School classrooms. The other thing I have to say with the El Molino options in general is there's the idea that the Laguna High School for maker labs or they would use the combined high school for those larger CTE spaces, as opposed to in the options with the Annalee and Laguna, since they're separate sites, there is a larger space for the Laguna High School. And then the other thing, there's also a new second gym in this option. And then the last option that we looked at was a new site with a whole new high school. And this doesn't take in consideration the site costs, since that's very complicated about whether, you know, whether sites, what's happening to the other sites. So that's just another question. This just looks at the new high school, again, for the same number of students. And again, it has, and it uses 40 acres, which is approximately the El Molino site. It's the same size as El Molino. El Molino is 39 acres. But for the site work. And then the square footage, the minimum CDE recommendation for this number of students, and this is excluding Laguna High School and the district office, is 155,000 square feet. And Annalee currently is 163,000 around, and El Molino currently is around 134,000 square feet. And this new high school, this option is around 200,000 square feet. It's all very rough. And then it also includes the Laguna, which would be 9,800 square feet, and the new 4,000 square foot district office. And again, this is extremely rough. numbers. And here again is the summary of all the costs. And again, I think the most important thing when looking at these numbers is to use them as comparison. Like how, oh, this one is, twice that one. Because there's so many things that aren't, they're very rough, they're square foot numbers. We're not looking at escalation depending when this is constructed or how COVID will affect construction costs. There's just a lot of unknowns. So it's more, I think the numbers are most useful as a comparison between the options. Jenny?
The next
Yeah,
one.
I'm here. Is there a next slide? Yeah.
Yeah, I have. So the question came up in our conversation was, what are the potential annual cost savings of moving all students to one campus? So these are estimates, but we estimate that we could save $200,000 a year in operational costs by moving all the students to one campus, and about $1 million in staffing costs, for a total of $1.2 million total potential annual cost savings of moving all of our students to one site.
And I think we're one more over. And this is now our question period. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can actually see people.
So if you have a question at this time, please go to the Q&A function and type in your question, if you would kindly. And I would encourage the trustees to come back on the screen. And if you have questions, after we wait, we're going to give our attendees an opportunity first, as we usually do, and then we'll ask the trustees to type in. Looks like we have a couple of questions.
All right, and I will help with the question moderation. Did you guys want to do board questions first, or did you want to do?
No, let's do our attendees first, and then we'll do board second.
Okay, so we have a question from Stephen Beck. Since it would take at least 2 to 3 years to implement any of the options, and likely even more for a brand new site, and student population will likely shrink further during that time and continue after occupancy, should not some of the buildings remain temporary structures? And
yeah, so should I answer that, Jenny?
Steve, you and I can tag team that one.
Okay. Okay. Essentially the question is right on. It does take time to have facilities be ready. In the minimum level 1 options, where we're just accommodating students without doing a lot of changes, that actually could be done very quickly. Because we're not doing things that would require a lot of construction, which means there would not actually be a time period for design and then approvals by the state and then the construction. So the sort of level 1, particularly at Annalee, could be done pretty quickly. Now at El Molino, we do have to bring portables, but generally that's a much faster process through the state. Matter of fact, our approvals through the state go through what's known as an over-the-counter process, so it does not go through a full project review as a site-built building would. So that would go pretty quickly as well.
And just to kind of double on that, again, just reminding our audience that this is just a 50,000-foot view of this. When and if a decision is made, there is a lot of effort and work that has to go into any one of these options 1, 2, or 3. So that's a process that we start kind of after we're given the direction. Again, this is just a really high level. Can it work? like Steve mentioned earlier, kind of a proof of concept. Moving on to the next question from Mary Fricker. If we consolidate the schools to one site to save 1.2 million a year, how much will we lose annually in the inter-district ADA?
That's a good question. I don't think we know.
We might not lose anything. We might actually get more students.
I don't know.
You don't know.
All right, moving on to the next question from Julie McLeland. If Elmo meets the site size, why would you look at a new site? And that's a great question. We did that as kind of an exercise just to answer a potential question that might be out there of, well, why would you modernize Annalee versus El Molino? Why wouldn't you look at a new property? So it's not necessarily something that we're suggesting. It's more something that we wanted to show that we had looked at. The process for procurement of property and the building of a new high school is potentially a decade-long endeavor. So we just wanted to kind of daylight that those were things that we also looked into. So I've answered that one. Sorry, I'm answering these live. Next one is from Audrey Bush. Were community impacts studied as well, for example, regarding traffic, parking, to move students to one site or the other? And I can tag team that with Steve and Sophia. Again, just reminding the audience, this is a 50,000 foot proof of concept. We are not at a stage where we're in the process of moving any one campus to another campus. To do those things, we will be required to follow some form of CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality
Act.
Thank you. Too many acronyms out there. So that is something that we would absolutely have to do. Again, this is just that initial phase of starting the conversations of what are the possibilities. And we've got a question from Linda Hopkins. Were the potential real estate values of the sites considered in terms of potential revenue to offset the cost of upgrading and consolidating a campus? I think this is more appropriate for the next section. Also, is it hard to imagine closing a high school campus when taxpayers just invested millions of dollars in a brand new theater at El Molino? Why were we spending money on a new building when consolidation was looming on the horizon and many millions are needed to just upgrade a campus to get it to meet the standards? I feel like I could answer the second half of that, but would need a little bit of board support. And the first half, I think, would be better discussed in section 2. Is that an agreement? So with respect to the El Molino Performing Arts Center, that was part of the Measure I bond that predates me a little bit, and that project was well underway and in the planning phases when I started with this district, and I was charged by the board to complete that project, and that was part of what the voters invested in. So I can't really speak to why we would be closing something. I think that's better left for maybe the board to address, but that is why we built the facility. I'm not sure if that completely answers anyone's question. I'm going to leave your question up there, Linda, for when we get into the next round. Jared Brown, is the district allowed to not meet the minimum CDE requirements when addressing the options? Steve, could you address that or Sophia, from what we're required to do?
Yeah, the CDE recommendations are exactly that, the recommendations. Now, when you're adding new facilities, or if you're modernizing new facilities, you do submit the plans for those changes to the campus for for review by and approval by CDE, particularly if there is state funding that's being applied to facilities, and state funding has really dropped off considerably for facilities over the last few years. So there's really not much of that going on anymore. But if you have existing facilities that are basically non-conforming, you can go ahead and occupy those facilities and use those facilities. I think as you currently are at Annalee, you can go ahead and continue to use those facilities.
Thank you for that. Next question is from Nicole Rathbun. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. What is included in the annual operational and staffing cost savings? How many and which FTE would be reduced? Could there be a way to keep the best teachers and not just the most vested employees?
You guys can probably address the operational costs.
Correct. I can do the operational. And Jeff, could you help me with this, because we talked a little bit and I don't quite have it on my radar. I know we did a year-by-year comparison of what the operational cost would be.
Yeah, essentially what we planned in talking with Jenny and in the discussion was, while we wouldn't be able to save all operational costs, because ultimately you don't shut down fully a campus, that you're looking to either one, repurpose, or to sell, or whatever that third option is. So there's still some operational costs there. So we anticipated about an 80% savings in the operational budget. And the cost to run each of the sites from an operational standpoint is relatively the same. So regardless of if or which direction it went, that relative savings should hold true while still being able to maintain whatever campus is being unused.
And in terms of the FTE, the reality is that there wouldn't be a significant reduction in teaching staff because the number of students would remain the same. So unless there were classes that could be combined, the reduction in staffing would not come from certificated staff. It would actually be coming mostly from classified staff, because the classified staff, we would not need to have classified staff for two schools. We would only need classified staff for one school.
Next question is from Kaylee and Piliquin. Sorry again. What is the timeline we are looking at for any of these options? Is this next year or the next 5 years? And Tony, do you want to take the first part of that, and then I can help with, and Steve maybe can help answer with like how the options could come to fruition?
Right, assuming that the board would come to some agreement by the end of this school year, we would take all of next school year to do the planning. And the earliest that we'd be able to do this wouldn't be till the 22-23 school year.
Correct. And then from a practical standpoint, for whatever phase of construction, the options that we provided, option one would be obviously just doing as little as possible to get everybody onto the same campus as quickly as possible. So that can happen relatively quickly. But when we're looking at options two, to meet CDE requirements, and option three to meet district criteria requirements, that's when we'll start to get into the master planning of the campuses and really work with staff on what the program needs are. And those will be multiple years before any of those are done and or ready. So the option one is just really the minimum, and then we'll start the major planning phase. So it will be a while before we would get to level 3 at any campus. This one's from Cassandra Albra. Which options, if any, rely on the passage of bonds? Great question. You saw the price tags on several of them. We only have a $90 million bond right now, of which we've spent. Jeff, could you help me remember how much we have left right now of the two? We've sold 2 series.
Yeah, so currently out of the 2 series we've sold, we have a little bit over 30 million left, but then we still I believe we have another 35 available that we can sell later.
Correct. So we would have to pick and choose what parts were modernized, and that's not untypical of when you're doing any master planning process. As I've told the board multiple times, even when we were starting just the conversations about going out for a bond, that we'll plan for what we want, and we won't be able to afford it all. And that's kind of what these scenarios describe. So we would either have to exhaust our existing bond and potentially go out for another one to meet all these options. And then we've got another one from Nicole Rathburn. Would the unused site be sold to help offset the costs of the site improvements? And I believe we addressed a little bit of that in the next section. It's hard to say. Tony, do you want to help me with that one?
Yeah, I think the next section kind of addresses that. It would be an option. Mm-hmm. Selling of the unused property would be an option. There are a lot of other options. You could lease it. I mean, there's a bunch of different options that will be talked about in the other parts of this presentation.
We'll also be discussing that a little bit when we get to legal, because in order to sell property, there is a process that you have to go through. And so we'll cover that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And then Michelle Ramos, sorry, I missed the part of the beginning of the meeting and the presentation. I was having trouble logging in with Zoom. At the new campus, would the student bodies and staff be consolidated and combined? Would Annalee and El Molino students have classes together at a new site? What about the Laguna students?
So yes, the idea would be that all students would share classes. So the student body and the staff would be combined onto one campus. The intention is to continue to offer a continuation high school. So, and an alternative education program. So the Laguna program would stay intact no matter what site it was housed on.
Thank you. Another question from Mary Fricker, and I think this just might be a clarifying question. We bring in almost 500 interdistrict kids, correct? That's roughly 5 million a year. If we're going to keep bringing them in, where would we put them? Would we build for them? What would that cost be? It seems critical information for analysis, right? Thank you.
So the interdistrict transfers are included in our projected numbers. So all of these scenarios were projected for close to 1,800 students, and that includes all of the students we have now, including the interdistrict transfers. So they're included in that number.
Thank you. And our last question right now is from Julie McLeland. Are classrooms with doors to the outside rather than hallways advantageous in COVID times? And I will let Steve or one of our architects address that.
Well, yeah, and there's an awful lot of study going on right now about indoor air quality in classrooms and how to improve the ventilation in classrooms. Matter of fact, this morning, I was just reading a study that we did for a school in Marin County, and it's looking like it's pretty much a wholesale replacement of those mechanical systems in that school in order to get sort of the minimum recommendations that the California State Department of Health is issuing. But this is really an area that's going to be studied a lot. There are some very significant issues around ventilation and the implications for energy usage, because while it's great to be able to bring a lot of outdoor air into a classroom and remove a lot of air to take those pathogens and viruses and bacteria and et cetera, and evacuate them to the outside, it's very expensive to heat and cool that air that you're bringing in into that classroom. So it is a very expensive proposition to replace the existing equipment, because existing equipment generally won't handle that sort of heating and cooling load. And then additionally, they're going to be very expensive because it's going to require a lot more energy to operate. So that's just the basics of it. And then how do you do that? There are some studies going on about displacement ventilation, which means basically bringing the air in at floor level and exhausting the air out at ceiling level. So essentially you're taking all of the air and just rising it in the space and then exhausting it to the outside. So rather than blowing air across a classroom, you're essentially going to be raising that air and exhausting it out through the top. So there's a number of those sort of things that are being looked at, along with filtering, MERV filtering, and HEPA filtering, and that sort of thing, UV disinfecting of recirculated air and that sort of thing. So all of that is under a lot of study right now. So you know, it's going to remain to be seen what are the most effective and cost-effective strategies for that.
Thank you, Steve.
So,
We have
Jenny,
mm-hmm.
we have time for this one last question, and then we'll take a short break.
Perfect. Thank you. Michelle Ramos's question: who is making the final consolidation decision? And Tony.
Well, that decision is made by the board. The board makes the decision whether to consolidate. We're at the end of the night tonight, we're going to outline that there are two decisions that the board will need to make. One will be, should we consolidate all students onto one campus? That's one decision. And then the second decision would be, to which campus would we consolidate the students? So those are both board decisions, and that's why we have outlined numerous ways to involve the community and hear the community and their concerns before the board makes that decision.
I kind of misspoke. So that's the last question we'll take from the public right now. Are there any questions from our board members? Ted, you're muted.
To the presenters, good presentations. I think I know the answer to this. For a whole new school site, brand new high school, was that cost estimate, did that include the acquisition costs of that site, or just a ballpark?
It did not. We didn't, probably because we couldn't even begin to predict what the cost of 40 acres in West County would be. And then we also assumed, yeah, it's a huge range. So we also,
the vineyard, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then there's also the question about, you know, whether or not you sell one of your existing sites to pay for that. So is that a net zero? You know, is a net gain? We don't really know until we actually do that kind of study. But the short answer is no, that was not included in those numbers.
Thank you. And Jeannie, can I respond to that one question about the Performing Arts Center or not?
No, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Diane.
It's really quick. People in the audience answered the questions I was going to ask, so I have none. Thank you for asking those to the public.
Thanks, Diane. Kelly, you have a question?
No, I was just going to say the same. A lot of the questions that I had got covered. So,
Angie, do you have any questions? Okay. I do have one question. One of the areas that I noticed was not discussed, except Linda Hopkins sort of kind of verged on the question, but am I correct that the new Emilino Theater has approximately 200 seats? Is that right?
I believe it's 299.
299. And am I correct that the Anley Theater has 900 plus seats?
Correct, roughly.
And there's no discussion about if we were to move to El Molino, enlarging the theater so that we could actually house the number of people.
No, we have not got into any of the what I would call the deep dive into the facility master planning. This is just the 50,000-foot view concept of, can this even happen?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just kind of wanted it to be clear to people how many seats each of those facilities housed. Okay, that was my only question. Thank you again also to the presenters. Oh, no, I do have one more question. If the Anley High School campus building or the main building was to be remodeled, upgraded, would the facade be kept if it was rebuilt?
Yes.
Typically.
Yeah, typically we would do that. You know, because we don't want to structurally change the building a great deal. What we want to do is modify the interiors to provide those standard size classrooms, and then provide the amenities for really modern classrooms.
Thank you, because it is a historical building, and I would hate to see that that change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you look at other campuses like Petaluma and Santa Rosa High, they have some of the oldest buildings. We're the third oldest in the county, and they've modernized the insides of those facilities while keeping the structural framework of the beautiful architecture from when they were constructed.
Perfect, thank you. That was my final question. Thanks very much. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here. 3 minutes, okay for everybody for a quick break?
Thank you.
3 minutes, okay. So
And
come on
then-
back in 3 minutes, folks.
Doug, you'll be queued up next.
Jenny,
Yes.
when you answer those questions, do they go, I mean, do we have a copy of those questions?
Yeah, they go into the answered queue and I have them all.
Okay, perfect.
So I'm answering them as completed just so I don't have to see them.
Got it.
And then I do still have them.
Okay, perfect. So I don't need to write them down.
No.
And Jenny, I'm ready with screen share when you feel the time's appropriate.
Copy that. We'll wait for Jeannie to come back and she'll let us know. If Doug, throughout the course of your presentation, you're able to kind of capture some of Linda Hopkins' comment that she had. Thank you.
How are we doing with time?
We're good. Got 1 more minute.
Okay.
And we're back.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we will move into our next segment, and I will let Jenny introduce Doug to us.
Perfect,
So,
Doug.
board members, if you would mute yourself and stop your video.
So maybe I should preface this by the next slide, and then we can introduce
Perfect.
Doug.
Doug.
So this next section is about workforce housing. This specific section focuses on the district office and Laguna High School properties, because when we started this conversation, that was the conversation that was happening at the time. So this was developed as a result of the possible Laguna High School relocation conversation that we were happening last fall. And it was based on the interest in being able to provide workforce housing for our staff and utilizing those properties. The process that Doug's going to describe, while it's specific to Laguna High School in this presentation, it is a process that could apply to any vacant site that we had, whether it was the Annalee property or the El Molino property. This process could be used in any case for any of the vacant properties that we have. So there you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. And I will introduce Doug Hilberman, who's with Axia Architects. He's one of our pool of architects that we awarded contracts to a little over a year and a half ago when we passed the bond measure. And he happens to have experience in housing development, which is why we asked him to help us with this study. So Doug, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, and I appreciate the board and your time tonight and our opportunity to present to you. I'm Doug Hilberman. I'm the president of Axia Architects. We're a 14-person architectural firm in downtown Santa Rosa. And as Jenny said, we have experience in a number of different building types, but we have both educational experience with educational facilities, and we have residential experience in terms of developing sites, multifamily and single family. So this exercise that we went through, it seemed like a good mix of those two elements to consider tonight. We were tasked with the idea of looking at the Laguna site and the district office with each of the scenarios that were presented earlier by QKA. The district office and the Laguna High School site were relocated to one or the other of the campuses. And as such, then the question that we were tasked with looking at was, what were some options to consider then? And to Linda Hopkins' question in terms of real estate values and best use of sites that may become available, how can we best position the district in terms of benefiting from the future uses of those sites? So with that, we'll be specific to the Laguna High School site and district office site. But as Jenny and Tony mentioned, a similar exercise could be done for any one of the sites, depending upon how the board considers consolidation. So with that, some of the first goals and objectives that we were looking at were, what is the maximum build out for residential on this site? What is the best use, and what is the maximum use, and what is the best use for the site? What is the most favorable build out, and also what steps would be required in terms of developing the site? And if it was developed, what level of engagement would the district desire to participate in? To take a look at the site here, The site over on the left here in the aerial basically comprises, you can see over on the right-hand side, there are 4 lots that are comprised by the district site. My cursor, I believe everybody can see, starts with the 2 properties that comprise the district offices, and then the Laguna High School site works its way into the additional 2 properties that are over next to Sunset Avenue and Taft Street. You can see the 2 of them identified on the Google map aerial to the left there, with the 462 Johnson Street identified for the district office, and then up to the left, the Laguna High School site and its ball field, or its blacktop recreational areas occurring out towards Sunset Avenue. The total of the 4 lots comprises approximately 2.96 acres, so just under 3 acres. Most of it is zone CF, which is community facilities. There's another element of this that needs to be taken into account, which is there's about 15 feet worth of grade change from Johnson Street up through to the westerly corner of the site up near Taft Street and Sunset Avenue. That comes into play, particularly as you start thinking about how the site lays out. And also, if you start to move into multifamily housing, then it also comes into play in terms of ADA accessibility through the site. Currently, the district office has an entry point off of Johnson Street, and Laguna has access from the Sunset Avenue Taft Street side. This takes a look at the zoning in the area. And as we mentioned, 3 out of the parcels you'll see there are in the green zone CF, which is the community facilities. 1 of the parcels tied to the district office site on Johnson Street is zoned R6. Now, one thing to note is the community facility zoning does not allow residential. And so if the district were to desire to put residential on this or sell this to a developer to put residential on it, there would need to be a rezoning of 3 of the parcels. The R6 zoning is probably most logical. Usually when we go through this, this exercise, we look at what are the adjacent zonings. And so when you look at the adjacent zonings around the district office parcel, the R6 zoning is descriptive of the adjacent neighbors. However, I will say the R6 can be more dense housing. The adjacent neighbors aren't necessarily meeting that zoning criteria in terms of the density requirements associated with R6. That's not uncommon because zoning evolves over time. And so the other reason we may want to consider an R5, which is 1 grade down from the R6, is, as we go to the next slide, the R6 zoning has a minimum residential density of 36 units per acre, with a maximum residential density of 51 units per acre. One of the reasons to possibly consider the R5 is it has the same features as the R6, but no minimum density requirement. So these are just options on the table, but in our opinion, probably the R6 or the R5 are probably the 2 zones to be potentially considering if the site were to be rezoned for residential. We went through a number of quick charrettes, different exercises in terms of how you could divide up these sites. We've grabbed just a couple of examples here that essentially span the gamut for you. From the left-hand side here, you'll see the basic small lot subdivision approach where each lot represents an individual residence and each lot is separated from a lot standpoint. In a small lot subdivision, we were able to come up with approximately 21 single-family detached units. In the second scheme, we looked at attached family housing, in this case, duets. So there was a combination of single-family residential for a couple of the lots, and the rest were all structured with duets. Duets would share a common property, and there would be two, when I say duets, there are two attached residential single-family residences that occur on that with a common wall between them. As an example, they might occur at a common wall between garages. In this scenario, we bumped up to about 25 single-family attached units that could be represented on the site. The third scenario there, to the right, was looking at multifamily housing. Now, R5 and R6 have a maximum of 2 stories and 30 feet in height. But if we looked at that and we looked at 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units, we could come up with approximately 44 multifamily units for the combined sites. Now, in all of these are quick studies. They're not meant to be an exact science right now. They're just at what some of the presenters mentioned earlier, which was a very 50,000 foot level to approximate different scenarios. When going through this process, with any planning department, there are 2 essential parts to a city or a county jurisdiction's planning department. One is what's called entitlements, and then the other is site or building permits. The entitlements tend to be about use of land, community impacts, environmental impacts. It's a process to review whether this is the right use for a property. The site permits and building permits are more about constructability and life safety. One starts with the entitlement process first, and once an entitlement process is approved, then one typically moves over to submitting for the building permit process. What you're seeing in front of you is a chart I've used in various situations to describe many of the different elements that could occur during the course of an entitlement process. So starting from the left-hand side, starting with selections of sites, feasibility analysis. What we're doing right now is an example of a type of feasibility analysis. Then moving into conceptual designs, submitting into jurisdictions. I won't go through all of these elements, but to say there are a number of different elements: rezoning, general plan amendments, department reviews, environmental studies, boards and commissions that review the project, all that work their way in through to getting to the point where you're through entitlements with an approval and conditions of approval as well, and some approximation at the top in terms of kind of minimum time frames that go along with each of these steps. The reason for showing this is to lend just a basic education to why it takes some development projects anywhere from 1 to 5 years to get through in entitlements, depending upon complexities of projects. So this is just some basic criteria, some of which may be applicable to any process that goes through for this particular site. Then we talk about level of engagement. And I've given here 4 examples, though there are many different types of engagement that the district could participate in. The very basic level would be to sell a site as is. The buyer assumes the risk for development. The buyer has to take it through the entitlement process if there's any rezoning or general plan amendments or design reviews or conditional use permits. But that's all on the buyer's risk and the buyer's expense. Second option would be that the district procures the entitlements and then sells to the developer. As an example, the district might rezone the site to residential, but then sell to the developer after it's been converted to residential. Typically, this may provide a higher potential value for the parcel, but the entitlement costs and the risks associated with that are then borne by the district. The third option is that the district and the developer partner. The sale of the parcel occurs only after the entitlements, and the developer pays for the entitlements. This sometimes is used by residential developers where they won't purchase a property until they can get it through the entitlements and know that they have the entitlements in hand. Then they'll buy the property and take it from there in terms of construction for building permits. Option 4 would be, as an example, the district and the developer partner. And something like this, just as an example, would be that the developer pays for the entitlements and the construction and then does a long-term lease back to the district for a number of years based on the idea that they'd lease back the residential units or workforce housing. And after a certain number of years, the district would own the residential development. There are a number of additional different scenarios, but we just wanted to throw up 4 different samples here in terms of the type of agreements or the type of participation that the district might engage in. So this gives you just a basic flavor of what someone might be able to convert the district office and Laguna High School site to, and how that might offer up some different opportunities in terms of how the district participates in that process. One could translate this across also to potentially the El Molino and the Annalee sites. This speaks a little bit to the question that was being raised by Supervisor Hopkins in terms of what were the potential real estate values of the sites, and how could some of that be applied to the future. With that, let me hand it back over and open it up for questions.
I'm going to stop the screen share and we'll invite everybody to come back.
Okay, so do we have any questions? Looks like we have one here.
Yeah, we had one a second ago from David Stetcher regarding the legal aspects, and I answered that by typing my response that Phil will be covering that when we go over the legal section.
Okay, thank you.
So I will ask, this is from Camille Escovedo. Are all of these options ones where the workforce housing would be for teachers and support staff of the campus? I'm happy to take that, or Tony.
I was going to say that's our intention, but you might know the more specifics about what you have to offer.
Correct. Well, first we'd have to, there has to have a lot that happens in order to get to that, and the legal will kind of go through some of those ramifications of what it looks like to surplus a property or use it for a different purpose than it's intended. With respect to workforce housing, the idea would be to get our community of teachers and staff, support staff, into these houses, but the logistics of how to get from point A to point B, there's a lot involved in that, and maybe Phil could chime in a little bit during his presentation on, or he can turn on his screen and chime in now.
I won't necessarily chime in now, but I think most of the
you're buffering.
Teachers for both classified and certificated, it wouldn't be excluded.
Phil, you were buffering a little bit right there. Could you try again?
Maybe I'll try to use it for working better.
There you go.
Anyway, sorry about that. The bottom line is what I was going to say was it usually is for certificated and classified, not just one or the other. It would apply to both. I mean, almost all the projects we've worked on, and Doug probably has the same experience.
Thank you. Another question from Mary Fricker. When you estimate that consolidating schools onto one site would save $1.2 million a year, does that take into account the annual bond cost to fund the new construction?
No.
No.
No, it does not. That would be the general fund savings. That's the estimated general fund savings.
You might want to explain the difference between general fund and bond fund savings.
Jeff.
I was just gonna say, Jeff can do that one.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the general fund is our operational fund. You know, that's where a lot of the annual expenses. The bond fund obviously funds the projects, and it funds, you know, in our case this year, a lot of technology that went out. And yes, there are costs associated with that, but it's in a, you know, it's in a different fund in which doesn't affect, you know, our day-to-day running of the school district.
Thank you. Another question from Cassandra Albra. Is the district considering workforce housing as an income stream for revenues in future budgets? It's a great question. That's really hard to say, because if we're going to, as Doug mentioned, there's a multitude of options for either a partnership or the selling of the property. With a partnership, the developer is typically taking on the costs for a significant period of time. So it would have to be a very structured deal to see how that could happen. At the end of the day, I think the goal would be for it to be a revenue stream, but to think that it would happen within the first 5 to 10 years would be a stretch. And I know Phil and I have had conversations at length about that. So feel free to chime in, Phil, if you have any insight there.
No, everything you said is accurate. If the district considers going down this road, you're almost certainly going to end up in a relationship with a developer of some kind. And those developers may have a harder goal, but they're also looking to make a profit. So those nuances will be worked out. You know, almost certainly there'll be costs that may get paid back by rents.
Thanks, Phil. I'm not seeing any additional questions here.
Do any of our board members have questions? Ted?
Phil, there was a district in the East Bay, I think it's a Union over there by Hayward, that did a similar thing by bringing workforce housing onto one of their high schools. Are you familiar with that one in the last 4 or 5 years?
There's been a handful, not just one. So I'm aware of a handful of them. I've worked with a couple of them, and everybody asks, well, how do you do it? And my answer is similar to what Doug's last slide was. I'll give you 4 of the 72 options there are, because there's so many different ways to structure it.
Sure.
Yeah, and they almost always, like I said a moment ago, do involve a developer. It's where the districts take on the role of everything from building housing, which school districts know how to build classrooms. They don't know how to build housing.
Absolutely.
And then taking on the role of managing a whole, in essence, apartment complex or housing development. So how to tie in that relationship. We've got one district where, and we've done it, and also it's not even on property we own, but we're willing to build. We're buying the building that's on top of real estate we don't own, but we own the building no matter what. So we've done. There's all different ways to do this. So, and you know, Doug's done a handful. We've done a handful. How to structure it is really going to be tied to ultimately what you want, and then trying to find the right partner to help with it.
So, if I could.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
So in those cases, Phil, you're looking at the needs and want of the district, short-term, long-term, as partners and revenue sharing. Is that the ultimate goal? I mean, the district can never, not supposed to go bankrupt. Have any of these districts gone bankrupt after doing a joint venture that you know of?
Not that I know of.
Okay. And we can cut it off right there because I don't want to get into commenting and stuff like that. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Ted. Any other trustees have a question?
If I could supplement just before that, just supplement a piece that Phil described there, because I think the one other piece that goes along with everything that Phil described is also funding sources. What you will also find is, depending upon where your funding's coming from, there may be certain limitations that go along with how you do acquisition associated with those funding sources. And acquisition will definitely affect the overall cost of the construction there. So the relationship, if you choose to have a relationship with the developer, between what the developer is doing versus what the district is doing, I think you will also find that depending upon where your funding sources are, you may decide that that affects which parts the developer is doing versus which part the district's doing too.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes, Diane.
This question might just let me know if it's not the time to ask it. Which comprehensive site is of the most profitable use and fair market value to develop and or sell if we were to sell a property?
Oh, that's the $1 million question.
Okay.
What I might suggest on that I've seen, because we do a lot of developer feasibility analysis, I can at least describe the steps that I would suggest maybe, you know, your next steps to get to that answer. And what you will probably want to do is you probably will want to do a little bit of a feasibility assessment of best use, maximum and best use for each of the 3 sites. Because then you would take that to an appraiser that would then take a look at what would be the dollar, you know, what would be the approximate value associated with each of those sites based upon maximum or best use for each of those sites. And I would imagine that's probably helpful information to have at your fingertips as you go through this process. If you really indulge in the consolidation conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Kelly?
Yeah, I have a question just following up on that. So it seems like there's a lot of different moving parts to this puzzle. And I'm wondering, it's, you know, looking at, it's almost, do we have 2 different decisions to make here? Because can we make the decision to move students to one campus while still holding on to some of the properties, and sort of then trying to figure out, because we would benefit from potentially some of the costs there, but we may not know in a short time frame what is the best scenario for selling properties, where we put the workforce housing. So are we able to kind of do these things sort of in parallel tracks? Like they're dependent on each other, but then they're also a little bit separate from each other. Is that?
That's absolutely correct. There's 2 different, and I think Tony alluded to this earlier, there's 2 different kind of conversations on the table. The one is consolidation of a campus, and the other one is what do you do with the other property? And those don't actually go together, because as Phil will discuss in the next round as we go through legal, there are steps to declaring property surplus, and whether you decide to sell it or develop it for a purpose other than what it's intended, that is another layer. And then we also know, and Tony, feel free to chime in here if I'm missing this piece, with the SCO study that's happening, is it in our best interest to look at that disposal of property right now, or do we wait till that conversation unfolds to see if there would be another use for whatever property was left over?
So is that accounted in some of the cost savings, the 1.2 million? Would that still include, is that cost of maintaining a property if we just want to hold on to it? Does that mean we actually save less than 1.2 million, or have we already accounted for that in the 1.2 million being able, because there's still gonna be some maintenance of that. We can't just like let it go.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. We,
and for lack of a better word, I don't know.
That's where Mia might be of a little bit of help with. We did leave some staffing and Jeff as well, some budget for maintaining the property. We wouldn't just abandon it and let the grass grow to, you know, ridiculous heights or anything like that. We would want to keep it. So I'm sure Mia and Jeff can kind of allude to how we figured out the 1.2.
Yeah, I can tell you on the budget P or the operational cost, Kelly, to run each site operationally, it's about $275,000 to $300,000 a year. So that $200,000 was leaving that extra to maintain while we made the decision of
75,000.
how to move forward. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question, Kelly. Good question. Thank you, Jeff. Angie, do you have any questions? Are you good?
I'm good right now. Thank you.
Okay, great. I personally don't have any questions with regards to that segment. So I guess with that, oh, looks like we have another question from David.
Perfect. David Stetcher, if we consolidate but keep the property on hold, is it possible that someone, say for-profit charter corporation, could try to demand space there to open a charter and take students? And that would be kind of a Phil question or a Tony question.
I think it's a Phil.
Okay. I'm gonna hover on this word demand. Could a charter demand it? No. Could a charter ask for it and say it's sitting there empty? Why don't you let us use it and apply a lot of pressure? Yes. But they don't have a right to take it from you. So you have to provide reasonably equivalent space to a charter school. If you can provide that space, as opposed to this site that you just vacated, then they can't demand it. I make it sound easy in those sentences. It's not easy, but they can't demand it from you.
I also have a hand raised from Leah Woody. Are we interested in taking a vocal comment? I know she might not be on a device where she can type a message. You're muted, Jeannie.
I'm okay with that. Is the rest of the board okay with it?
All right.
Okay.
And hold on one second. And Leah, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Leah, did you hear me? You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Hopefully we're not having technical difficulties again. Leah, if you want to go ahead and email me your comment, I will read it as soon as I get it.
Okay. Oh, looks like she's trying to do something.
Yeah.
Leah, are you there?
No, I took her out.
Okay. All right. All right. Not a problem. Yeah. Let's see.
And we got another question from Julie McLeland. Please review why it would be advantageous to consolidate campuses if we would still be holding the property.
There's your cost savings.
There's a cost savings. There's a cost savings to moving all the students onto one campus. And there continues to be a cost savings with all students on one campus and holding the other campus without students. It's still a $1.2 million savings.
And I don't think it would be necessarily held forever. We would have to have a discussion about what will be done with the property. But again, just pointing out there's two different conversations happening tonight. And that's the last of the questions. And I'll double back if Leah's able to email me. Oh,
all right. Are we
another one from
this?
Linda.
Okay, here you go.
Linda Hopkins. Does the 200+ K a year figure include around the clock security or just basic building maintenance and landscaping? With the Chenate property owned by the county after the hospital used and ceased, we found that an abandoned property quickly became an attractive nuisance and a source of crime, and that our security costs escalated dramatically once word got out that there was a large abandoned campus. People broke into buildings and stole things, sold drugs, there was graffiti and vandalized things. I don't think we discussed 24-hour around-the-clock security, but there are ways to secure a premises. Right now, we could say that a lot of our facilities are vacant and we have active staff working daily. I think it's keeping the property maintained from a peripheral view, street view, makes it less attractive for people to come and vandalize it. There would be some site security measures that we would need to take, but the idea would be that we would have somebody staffed there daily to maintain the physical plant and to check on it regularly, much like we do right now.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, do we need to take another short break or do we want to move into Phil's presentation? Ted's nodding his head. Okay, so we'll take another short
Yes, I
2
think
minute, 3 minute, 2 minute, 2 minute, 2 minute break. Okay, 2 minute break. So come right back.
Jenny, I went ahead and started sharing my screen already.
No, you haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, I tried.
Go ahead and click share screen. Select your screen.
Thought I did. Hang on.
If not, I got it up, so I can always pull it up.
No, I got it. Here we go.
I'm tech prepared today.
How about now?
You're good.
All right.
It is up. And we're ready to come back, you guys, anytime.
Okay, come on back, y'all.
And I had a question come in from David Stetcher while we were on break, which is a pretty interesting question. Jenny, does or will the study offer figures for partial shutdown of one campus, a possible small cohort or focused curriculum students? And I think I can say that no, we have not looked at that. We have not factored in COVID into this study.
Yeah, this study was done in April, already in April, so kind of pre-COVID.
I don't think he's referring to COVID. I think he's referring to maybe a small group of students who utilize that campus for a specific curriculum reason versus closing down the whole entire campus, still using the campus for certain things.
Got it.
Okay.
Right. I think that's what Dave was talking about.
Mm-hmm. And are we good? And he said yes, that was what he was talking about. So no, we have not looked at that yet. And I think, Jeannie, we are ready to come back if you're ready to let us go.
Okay. I'm trying to get my screen back to, here we go. Okay. I can't find my screen with all the people's pictures.
Here, I'll stop sharing really quick. Hold on. Sorry, Phil.
There it is.
And then I'll let you guys get situated, and then we'll let them share the screen.
That's why. Okay. Alrighty. So we are going to proceed with our third section, which is regarding the more along the lines of the legal aspects of these items. And I don't know if Tony, you've got intro, or if Jenny, you do, and then you'll introduce Phil.
Yes,
so
exactly.
The board members would mute yourself and turn off your video, please.
Perfect. Phil, you can go ahead and share your screen. And I'd like to introduce Phil Henderson with Orbach, Huff, Suarez, and Henderson. That just rolls right off the tongue. And he is our attorney and has been our attorney for about 5.5 years now since we passed. We've been working together since Measure I and helping us with our Measure A and a lot of our lease-back contracts, as well as all our bond stuff. And we told him what we were doing, and we felt that he would be wonderful at presenting the legalese of this, because it is a complicated legal process. So I'll just let Phil take it from here.
Thanks, Jenny. And as we're approaching 2 hours into this, I get the unsavory task of diving right into law at the end of this. I am going to, as both the three presenters before it said, try to fly at about 50,000 feet. Maybe I'll come down a little bit lower as times on some of the slides. A lot of what I'm going to get is kind of data driven. I am not going to explain every single word on every single slide. I will explain the nature of what's happening, but a lot of it has to do with detail that you can take with you and continue to look at later. And I obviously would be here to answer any questions as we move forward. So make sure I got the right place. First, we're going to break this up into two sections as we've been talking about. The first is school closure. What does it take to actually close a school? Talk about reviewing facts, consider the options, and making a decision. I will say right now that I'm going to talk about closure. And we've been talking in the last couple hours about consolidation. For example, if we move Laguna High School, let's say, to Elmo or something. A little bit different because you're not actually closing a site, you're relocating it. But I am going to be talking about closure. So ultimately, if we closed the site and just moved students and everybody went to one site, that would be in essence what we're talking about. And then I'm going to talk about disposition, meaning selling or long-term leasing the property if you ended up closing a site. And we'll talk about these particular items, and this is just the outline here. There was a question earlier about one of the board members on the timing of this. So a little bit can be done in sync. So certainly you wouldn't want to start figuring out how to sell a property or long-term lease it if you haven't closed the site yet. But there'll be a point in time if you go down this road where you're working on coming to a decision on whether or not to close perhaps a site. that you could start establishing the first couple steps on what your next process would be, which is the disposition process. And we'll talk about what a 7-11 committee is in just a few more slides, but I wanted to bring it up here. So that would be something that could start, if you will, in tandem as the closure process is winding down, if you will. In essence, and I also have a note there about other steps that happen as far as disposing of the property, where you have to offer it to public entities, or you can put it out to bid. And there's a way to do those in sync, or not quite in sync, but in tandem, crisscrossing one another, if you're trying to save time in that process. But we'll talk about that. So first, let's talk about closure. Again, I know we've been talking a bit about consolidation, but I hope I was kind of clear a moment ago on what the difference is. I'm a lawyer here, and the first thing I'm telling you is there is no real law that restricts or requires you to do anything to close a site. And I don't mean to be cavalier about that. There's a lot that goes into doing it. But the ultimate decision is yours, is the board's. The board makes the ultimate decision on whether or not to close a particular school site for lots of reasons, as we all know. But I will say the CDE has a pretty detailed document called the Closing of Schools Best Practices Guide. And we're going to walk through a little bit of what that is in the next few slides. But again, none of it's not based on laws or regulations and requirements. It's policy and best practices, just as they talk about. So again, we're going to talk about a 7-11 committee here in a little bit, but I'm going to leave that for the surplus property, the disposition discussion, because that's when we recommend you establish the committee. The CDE talks about it because it's actually called the District Advisory Committee on Facilities. That doesn't roll off the tongue either. That's why we call it the 7-11 committee. So the District Advisory Committee on Facilities, it's required when you dispose of property. It's not required to have that involvement during a closure process. CDE recommends it. Frankly, we don't. And I'll tell you why when we get a little bit farther down the road. Okay. So the CDE does recommend, and so do we, the first step you want to do when you're considering closing a specific site is frankly what you've been hearing about for the last 2 hours. Gather a chunk of the facts. What is it that is your situation? What are the details that are going on? Determining enrollment projections. What are the capacity? What can you do with particular sites if you move kids from one to the other? That's a lot of what you got in the past couple of hours. And as I think all of the presenters have been saying, really step one and maybe step two. A lot of the questions assume the board had already made a bunch of decisions. Haven't. You're really just now gathering facts, getting information. Again, I won't go through everything on this particular slide. These are a handful, well, 2 handfuls of some of the facts that the CDE recommends that you gather along the way. And I'd say at least half of these you've already done. Some of them we've already touched on tonight. Like, what's the cost benefit of closing one site versus the other? Absolutely something you'd want to consider moving down the road. And you've touched on a lot of that earlier. So once you've gathered the facts, again, logical step, what do you do with all that information? Well, you consider what the options are moving forward then. Are there other things you can do besides closing a site? And that's a lot of what CDE focuses on when they're talking about options, because closing a site is a big decision. In most districts, it's sleepless nights, and it's difficult to come to that conclusion because you know you're going to impact lots of folks. So part of the options that the CDE talks about, a lot of them are, what other options are there perhaps that could be looked at in lieu of closing a site? Can you expand class sizes perhaps at some sites? Could you maybe surplus a portion of a site to keep the main site open and lease that site out? Can you reorganize attendance boundaries perhaps to move kids from one site to another? Things to consider once you've gathered all the facts on other options to move forward. So again, that's first step is gathering some facts, a lot of facts, and then consider the other options then moving forward. Again, a lot of what you've heard tonight deals with these options as well. And ultimately, and again, I don't mean, 3 or 4 slides doesn't really sufficiently describe the kind of process you're going to have to go through to make these ultimate decisions, but the decision will ultimately land on the board to make that decision on whether or not to close a particular site. And again, I want to reiterate, and maybe I've done it too often, we're not talking about consolidating, which is still an option. It's still something to be considered, I know, by the board, and you guys have already brought it up a bit tonight. But I'm talking about if you ultimately decide to close a site completely, just move the children, not move, if you will, the name of the school or the programs over. So again, after considering the facts and the options, As I said at the beginning, you have the authority to decide whether or not to close the school, knowing everything that goes into it. Encourage community involvement. You guys are doing it now, and I know you're going to continue to do it. That will, of course, happen. Consider the potential for racial segregation impacts. You have to look at the demographics to know if closing one site and moving all kids to another is going to have a separation that you didn't intend because you didn't know the full demographics until you did the studies. And that's a factor that should be considered. We talked earlier, it seems like an hour and a half ago, maybe it was, about CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And then considering the environmental impacts should be done really at the receiving site. So if you close a site and move hundreds of kids over to a receiving site, it's that receiving site that's going to have the environmental impact because it's going to have more kids, more traffic, likely parking issues, the other things that come up when we analyze CEQA. As far as the closed site, CEQA is very easy. It's actually what we call a notice of exemption. You close the site. The environmental impact of closing it is usually really nothing. And if anything, it relieves some impact because there's no traffic, etc. And again, relocating a school or program to a different site is not closing the school. That's the consolidation discussion we've been having. I'm going to shift gears then. So we've gone through the steps of closure. We're now talking about, we've made the decision. Let's say we've made the decision to close the site. As I said in that slide, probably 4 slides ago, the 7-Eleven committee, and this is the slide about it, could come in somewhere near the end of the closure activities that we're having. If we're pretty certain we're going down the road, we could establish our 7-Eleven committee, the District Advisory Committee on Facilities. And what that is statutorily required if you're going to dispose of property. I'll describe disposition in a minute. What makes up that committee, or we call it 7-Eleven because it's 7 to 11 members, that's what the statute says. And there's no requirements that all these people that are listed, and I've got them listed here on the slide, are on the committee, but that's the goal of the 7-Eleven committee. Pull these folks from your community. And who are they? It's the board members, staff members, Tony and Jenny. Everybody's going to call everybody they know and try to get them on the 7-Eleven committee. Think of it somewhat similar to like a bond oversight committee. Different function, but it's the same type of committee that is there to help advise the board. It's not an oversight role, it's an advisory role though. So teachers, landowners, business people, parents, of course, these people would be the goal to have on your 7-Eleven committee. Again, statutorily required if we're going to dispose of property. In about 5 or 6 slides, I'll talk about instances that are exceptions to surplus. But if you're going to do a long-term lease or you're going to sell property, this has to be your first step. So what does the 7-Eleven committee do? Excuse me. They advise the board on whether or not there is surplus space. We keep on talking about surplus property. Really, we talk ultimately about space, surplus property that you own. So let me give you a hypothetical. The district owns 5 sites and it occupies all 5 sites, including a district office, et cetera, and 4 schools, let's say, but it only thinks it needs 3. Well, then that 5th site, or school site, would be potentially surplus. And if you're thinking of selling that site or closing it or whatever, you're going to establish the 7-Eleven committee. That committee will advise the board after going through its duties on whether or not that site is surplus. And they look at all kinds of data. They evaluate district-wide issues. Even if it's only one site, they have to look district-wide at what the impact would be. So what do? They review projected enrollment. They come up with a priority list. That would probably apply for larger districts. You only have a handful, less than a handful of sites, but it would still be something to consider. They do hold hearings. Sometimes there's only one hearing to get community input. But again, the 7-Eleven committee itself is part of the community, but they hold a hearing to invite everybody else to come in and speak to it. And they make a final determination of what their recommendation is going to be and the tolerance of use. Interesting term, tolerance of use. Really what that means is what is going to be the capacity of the sites over 5 or 10 years. We have to project, do we think the district's going to need that site in 7 years, let's say, even though they don't need it now? Well, then it wouldn't necessarily be surplus. So we usually staff helps the 7-Eleven committee work through its process of evaluating the sites and coming to its recommendation. And ultimately what its recommendation might be that the site is not surplus, do not get rid of it. And our recommendation is don't sell it or long-term lease it, or which oftentimes happens is the 7-Eleven committee has done the analysis and says, yes, we think it is surplus. And they write a report to the board. And that report, clicking on here, The board receives that report. Now, the 711 committee reports, they could be one sentence, but I've never seen them as one sentence. They usually describe the steps they went to. They oftentimes describe what's the highest and best use. They can recommend what they think is fair market value. They can recommend what they would like the board to then do with the property. All that is advisory. It's their suggestion, their recommendation. The board ultimately receives the board, considers the recommendations, and then the board takes its own action though. Boards can vote differently than a 711 committee. There's nothing telling a board to follow what the 711 committee says. The board ultimately, again, it's your responsibility as elected officials to make the ultimate decision. But this step has to be done to pull in that information from the community before potentially long-term leasing or selling a piece of school district property at that point. So again, let's assume we've taken all those steps, and I know I'm going somewhat quickly, but hopefully not too quickly. A couple of things then have to happen. Let's say we decide we want to, again, long-term lease, and I will explain that a little bit more when I talk about other options, or sell the property. So a property has been deemed surplus. What are we going to do with that property? Because it's a piece of public property and you are a California school district, you must first do what we call public offerings. You have to offer it to other public entities. And first the publication goes in the newspaper, runs for 3 weeks. And then as well, you send it's just a one-pager letter. And depending on the public entity, they have 40 or 60 days to respond back. And you say, we have this property available for sale or a long-term lease. I've identified some of them there. It's the city, the county, the UC system, the CSU system, public housing authorities, and a handful of other folks get the letter from you. And they all have those 40 or 60 days to respond back on whether or not they are interested in the property. Now, again, to try to keep this somewhat brief, if it's recreational property, where there's a thing called the Nailer Act, and the public entities, like the Park and Rec District, for example, they'll get a letter. They could offer you what is a lower than fair market value price for the property based on what we call the Nailer Act. I didn't include it on here because it really can get nuanced. And that's only if it's recreational property or deemed recreational, and only if the public, like the Park and Rec Department, necessarily want it. We can talk more about that if you'd like to, as we keep going. Let's assume something here. Let's assume that none of the public entities were interested, or that we couldn't come to an agreed upon price. You don't have to sell it to, let's just say the county, for example, for a price that you couldn't agree on. Let's say they offered you $3 million for a site. You don't have to accept it if it's not in the board's determination a fair price, a sufficient price for them. I will say though, if you're going to go out for this next step, which is formally bidding it out to the world, the rest of every private entity that's able to buy it, and you sell it to them for less, you better have a good explanation for it. And that has never really happened in my experience. But as I said in the slide earlier, we coordinate this with the public offerings. So if we're worried about timing and want to get the process moving, we don't always have to wait to the very end of the public offering period, that previous slide, for those 60 days to run before we put it out to bid. We will wait maybe about 40 or some odd days into it, run our first ad for formal bidding. And if for some reason a public entity comes in at the 11th hour on day 59, for example, we'll still receive bids if we want to, and we'll consider what we're doing with the public offerings. There's nothing prohibiting us from, if you will, coordinating those. They don't quite run in tandem at the same moment, but once the public offerings have gone for a while, and we can start the formal bidding process if we want to keep the clock moving. There's a couple steps the board has to take. I won't dive too deeply into it. You need to pass a resolution. You notify the previous owner. Kind of an archaic thing. It isn't like they get a special deal. You just have to let them know you're selling it if you can find out who they are. And then just like we do with construction bids, we put it out for formal bidding. We're not looking for the lowest responsible bidder. We're looking for the highest responsible bidder because we're selling something this time. We're trying to get the highest value from that property. In a few more slides, I'm going to touch a bit on what Doug was talking about in workforce housing. Okay. A couple other points before we get to the fun stuff. We can go to the State Board of Education and ask for a waiver of some of the steps that I just talked about in the last half a dozen slides or so. And And we've done that for a handful of clients, and it depends on the situation. We explain it in the waiver form saying, you know, for this and this reason, we want to avoid having to find the surplus steps. We want to avoid doing the public offering, and perhaps we want to avoid formal bidding because we have what we think is the best value with this particular buyer and it's benefiting the public for X, Y, and Z reasons. We can do that. It's not always the best option, and sometimes it takes almost as long as going through the steps anyway. So we can talk about it if it's something the board wants to consider down the road if we're there. Okay. Something I know will come up and I want to talk about, and I apologize for having maybe too much data on the next two slides because there's a lot of words on it. And some of it has come up just in the past month as well. What can we do with the money? So let's say we long-term lease or lease with an option to purchase or resell the property. Lease revenue can be used really in any way the board directs. It's considered like operating costs. If you lease something and you receive benefit from it, you're allowed to use that money, if you will, into your general fund. You can use it in whatever means you want to use it. There's a specific statute that says, okay, if you have a lease, but there's an option to purchase, don't think you got away with anything because you only can spend those funds in a restricted fund for routine repair of your facilities for up to a 5-year period. And there's the state allocation board, the SAB, which I'll say that SAB a few times for the next slide or so, has the determination of what that's going to be. If you sell the property, the starting point for selling property is that first sub-bullet under sale, which is the money shall be used for any capital outlay for cost of maintenance in school districts that would not recur within a 5-year period. Meaning, if you're selling property, it's supposed to be used to improve or buy new real property, long-term like construction costs, which again wouldn't necessarily be in the discussions we've had for the past couple of hours. That's entirely possible that if the district did decide to sell a site, that the funds would very likely possibly be used to improve the site that's going to receive the students from that site anyway. There is an option for a one-time use of sale proceeds. And they must come, in the district, you must comply with certain provisions. The most recent version was SB 820, signed just last month by Governor Newsom. And there are some regs already interpreting it. This particular item, sale of proceeds and using it for one-time general fund use, has been around for, it's been around for a while, and about 12 years ago, when the market had some issues, a handful of districts wanted to use the sale of real property to help to pay for long-term benefit obligations, pensions, healthcare benefits for former employees, etc. So there was some work on that statute. It ultimately sunset, but now we have this relatively new one. Again, it's only 3 weeks old, frankly, at this point. And if we decided we want to sell a piece of property and then use those funds for a one-time general fund use, these are the steps we'd have to take. I'm trying to do a little bit of reciting here, but I'll go through it. It's applicable if the original purchase was made using non-state funds. And if you've had the site for 60 years, it may be hard to determine that, but we would make that argument if somebody were to question us at the state. The SAB, State Allocation Board, that's the acronym I used a moment ago, will reduce your financial hardship funding if you have it and if it's applicable. So if the district is getting financial hardship money, not fiscal, but not facility, but financial hardship funds, this would reduce it unless we make an appeal, I'll call it an appeal, to the SAB to say, no, we've had excessive costs due to our construction program. Please still give us our financial hardship money. The board must adopt a plan regarding that one-time use, explaining what you're going to do for that one-time general fund use. And the board must certify to the SAB a couple of things: that the sale does not violate the provision of a local bond, and I don't suspect it does. The property is not suitable to meet projected school construction needs for the next 10 years. That's tied to what the 7-11 committee would have determined. 7-11 committee doesn't always look 10 years out, but frankly, if the district was considering using the sale proceeds for a one-time general fund use, we would tell the 7-11 committee, project out not just 5 or 7 years, project out 10, and make sure we have that data, that determination made. And it applies for the next 4 years. So it does have a sunset provision. We're kind of seeing how it's going to go. Okay. This slide could probably take over another 2-hour presentation, but I'm not going to do that to you. But let me touch real quickly on other things and things we can do with property. And I'll be honest with you, for most of our clients who are looking at what to do with property, a lot of these kick in most of the time. And how about that for two advocates here? So there's a joint use statute, meaning we're allowed to jointly use our sites with, frankly, almost anybody. It's up to 5 years. If it's with another public entity, it can be longer. If it's with another public entity or somebody who actually improves our site, it can be longer. So joint use is used actually quite a bit for, think of it like daycares or something else that is leasing property from you, maybe 3 classrooms at a particular site for, well, maybe not for high school district, but for preschool, after school activities, etc. There's another statute called joint occupancy, a little bit more dense. It can be up to 99 years. We will sometime use this for workforce housing or something like that, but not a lot. We've had other ways to use workforce housing. I'll get to that in a minute. Community fields, sometimes we'll do it this way. It used to have a requirement that you go to the State Board of Education to have them sign off on that. That was removed this year. So we no longer have to go to the state to approve a joint occupancy. There's still more bells and whistles than joint use, but it can last longer. So sometimes we look at it because it can go up to 99 years. We oftentimes have districts who, if there's property in their district that they could use, and they own a site that perhaps a developer wants, is there an exchange of property that can happen? Exchanges are procedurally relatively easy. We don't have to find anything surplus because we're not really surplus and we're getting property for property. The values don't have to be equal. There's usually money that comes in because you are never going to find 2 pieces of property that cost exactly the same. And if somebody's got property you want, you've got property they want, it's a relatively easy transaction. What's not easy is finding the perfect piece of property you want for somebody with somebody who has that wants the property you own. So that's the difficulty in trying to find that one. Quickly, there is something called a fee producing facility. We oftentimes will use that for like warehousing, etc. We're similar to joint occupancy, where it's usually up to 35 years for fee producing, the whole government code provision. But again, if there's an entity that wants to generate like a CNG station, we've done it for a few times for a CNG station. We've done it for warehousing units where somebody else wanted to use like 6 acres we had, open up a whole public storage and warehousing, and we had a portion of it. That's a good use of the fee producing because somebody else is taking over the management and the construction of the thing. We get a portion of it and we get a portion of the rents that come on the rest of it. Workforce housing is, again, another option. I didn't put on the slide because I knew Doug was handling it, but I'll just touch on it, but he touched on 99% of it. As far as ways to do it, there's already at least 2 statutes. One is the Teacher Housing Act, and there's another one that doesn't have a cute name, but are provisions that allow us to use our property a lot more freely. We don't have to go through the surplus property determination. If we're ultimately engaging in a partnership or if we're developing a piece of property for workforce housing for teachers and all staff for a district. So that would be another one here. And I guess the last final point, I mean, you can always keep property vacant. You still have to you've already talked a bit about this, you still have to maintain it. If you don't use the site, there's a small fee that you pay to the state each year for the non-use fee. But other than that, that is still an option. I know some of the math that you folks have done up to this point took into consideration some of the work you'd still have to do at a site, even if nobody was there and you'd already closed it. Okay. Well, that was pretty quick for marching through a whole bunch of laws. So Jenny, I'm going to either punt back to you or you're going to take over the screen back from me, one or the other.
Thank you, Phil. I think that was kind of interesting in some aspects. So do we have any questions? Looks like we have one. Jenny, you want to read it?
Oh, she's unmuted. She's muted. Jenny, are you muted? We can't hear you.
I can read the question. It's okay.
I can read it too.
Debbie Ramirez says, how would the recent bond-funded construction of the performing arts facility at El Molino impact a potential sale of the property? Good question.
I mean, I can answer it as far as what it will do. It will increase the value of it because it's a nice new performing arts center. It was, if I remember correctly, built with local bond funds. I don't know if you had state match money for it. And if it did, I'd have to look at what potential state money might have been used, but it was local bond funds. Again, if you're recouping the funds in the sale, I don't think there's a limitation on it. It is unfortunate because it was just built potentially, depending on ultimately what the district might decide on the use of the site.
I don't see another question.
Well, that's what usually happens when you put the legal stuff at the last. We lost the audience.
Jeannie, you're muted.
Thank you. We've actually dropped off about close to 20 people from when we started. So
here's another question.
Okay.
I can read this one. This is from Audrey Bush. Can you clarify the 7-Eleven committee is only relevant to the disposal of property, not regarding the decision to consolidate?
The short answer is yes, that's correct. I think I mentioned in the earlier slides, the CDE, the California Department of Education, recommends that the 7-Eleven committee get involved in the decision to close a site. And I think I said at the beginning, maybe I didn't explain it very well, maybe I will right now. We don't recommend that. By all means, I want community involvement. I know you folks do too. You need to have community input on how it happens. But it doesn't strike me as the proper use of a 7-Eleven committee to have them, in essence, make a pre-decision for you. The decision's the board's. Ultimately, the decision is the board. And by no means am I suggesting that the community wouldn't have input. But I don't think establishing a 7-Eleven committee, which is, on surplusing property, which would come in at the point when you decide what to do with it ultimately, should necessarily be brought in when the heavy decision of whether or not to close a site is in front of the board.
We've got some more questions. There's a question from Audrey Bush. So what alternative do you suggest in order to best obtain community input on the topic of consolidation?
Tony, do you want to take a shot at that, or I can too, either way?
Yeah, I was just thinking that our process is to we're gonna have 45 minutes of question and answer at our next board meeting. We have a town hall meeting scheduled, and it's at the end of this on the slide. We have 2 town hall meetings scheduled, completely devoted to this topic to get questions and hopefully give answers and get input from the public. And then there are additional board meetings. If after 2 town hall meetings we need additional input, then we can always schedule another town hall meeting. But that's our plan for getting community input.
And frankly, that would, again, I'm not on the board, but if my experience is, that would strike me as a better use of everyone's time, as opposed to having a committee that's hopefully not going to make a decision.
Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
We can hear you now, Jenny.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, now we can.
Oh, finally.
Anyway,
one meeting without technical difficulties, just one.
No, we have to have it. And it's 2.5 hours in. You're good. I was just echoing, Tony, you were making a very good point. I think that the discussions that we're talking about having should be with the board, not a separate committee that's over here that would later on then make a suggestion to you so you can have further meetings. Let's have the meetings with the board.
Jenny, are you back?
I am back, I think.
Okay.
So,
Julie McClellan's question.
Which one? I've got 2 from her.
When does the conversation about inequity for students who live far from campus For example, if Elmo is closed, how will the students who already travel 90 minutes to school be helped? I think that's part of all of the conversations. The first decision that the board would need to make is if we close a school. And once that decision is made, then the conversations and the decision is made by the board of which of those two campuses to close. So that's all part of the conversation that would have to happen before that decision, the decision of which campus to close would be made. So that's the first one I just got to. Oh, you've resolved them. Okay. Camille Escovedo asks, in legal terms, what are the most likely options the board is considering for the to-be vacant campus? What are the most likely options?
I think it's too soon to tell.
We're just taking input now. We have no decision has been made and there's no likely decision at this point.
Let's see. Julie McClellan, contact. When is that question appropriate? I'm not sure I understand. Maybe she could ask it in a different way. And then there's a question from Nicole Rathman. When will potential sale revenue be analyzed against potential revenue from a partnership to develop market affordable workforce housing in the short and long term? Wouldn't that also influence which site to select?
I think that is kind of a long-term discussion.
Mm-hmm.
What Doug alluded to a little while ago during his presentation was kind of going into the next layer of the study of where we would provide some analysis on the value of each of the properties at different stages. So that would be kind of the secondary part of the conversation. Otherwise, I feel like we're not even close to being there, and I'm not entirely sure what short term means, because anytime you're looking at the development of a property, the short term is really the long term.
I will say that I'll say the normal time when it comes up is pretty early on in the disposition process, because we're trying to figure out, and even while you have a 7-11 committee going on and perhaps finding the site surplus, the district should be doing its own investigation. Okay, what do we think we can do? I think there was a couple questions up there. What are we going to do with the to be vacant site? Well, there will be a point in time if we continue to go down this road where we are going to investigate. Are the developers interested? If we're going to do workforce housing, what is it going to look like? Where would it be? What's the appraisal for each of the 3 sites? We haven't done. I don't think we've done an appraisal yet for the site. So there's steps that would come. Not tomorrow, but relatively soon in the process, at least in disposition, on what are the value of the properties, what's the most likely and possible uses for those properties. And that's going to play a lot into the decision making. It may come in a little early here, perhaps in the facts and the options just regarding which site to close. Those financial factors may play in. Right now, I think you're looking more at the financial factors of keeping the site operating. What's it doing? What's the draw on your budget for that? Then, long term, you have property in the West County. How valuable is that property? And is one site more valuable than the other? Probably. And that can play into your decision. I think probably what's going to play into your decision more is what is the impact to our students, to our families, to the teachers, to everyone else. And then as well, the value. Don't get me wrong. We aren't ignoring the finances, but all those other factors tend to play pretty heavy now. Sorry.
There's another question from Debbie Ramirez. I appreciate this meeting being recorded because many people likely wanted to watch the vice presidential debate, which overlapped. Since community engagement and input around this issue is pretty important, I'm wondering if you will also record all future board discussions around this matter. Do we record every board meeting, Jenny?
We do not record our board meetings currently. Our storage capacity starts to become an issue because our board meetings are very long. we don't have that much storage capacity. So if we're talking about long-term retention, that becomes a little difficult. We can start the recording of certain segments of the board meeting and post those.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. And then she responded by saying Santa Rosa City School stores them on YouTube.
Understood. You still have to retain them somewhere.
Yeah.
And so we retain them in our cloud. Jeannie, you're muted.
Thank you. So we've gotten the public's input here for this last segment. Are there any board comments or not, excuse me, any board questions? Yes, Angie.
Yes, I was only under the understanding that consolidation was on the table. Do you have any input on like closing a campus versus consolidating? And just kind of like the pros and cons?
Difference.
Yeah, well, sure. When we talk about consolidating, and I don't, I don't mean to make it sound like it's just nomenclature, because I think there is a difference. When you're talking about consolidating, let me just use an example. Let's say we keep Annalee open and we move all the El Molino kids over there. Are we going to have an El Molino school at Annalee, or are they just going to become Annalee students? That would be the question. If they're just going to become Annalee students, then you've closed El Molino. Usually when we talk about, consolidation or moving, and I've got some districts that have done that. It's the so-and-so school at so-and-so site, and they'll have 2 schools. There's an identity for the schools. Usually it's tied to a program. It's tied to something like that. So that could be the difference between a consolidation, if you will, and a closure. The impact on the site where all the kids are leaving is the same. In other words, that site now becomes vacant. It's where the students are going and how they're being classified, if you will, maybe the wrong term. That's really what turns it into, if you will, a consolidation or a merging of the 2 schools, as opposed to just closing one and moving all the kids over.
And I forgot to mention, we do have one more slide once we're done with the legal for Tony, just to kind of round out the evening with the next steps. And I do have another question.
It's a comment.
Huh?
It's a comment.
Oh.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that specific topic that Angie just brought up? So would there be a different cost savings then? And because I hadn't really thought about that scenario where you would have almost like a small magnet. You could have a magnet program at Annalee that would be a separate school. Would the cost savings then be different?
I'm going to punt to Jeff or Jenny.
I think from that standpoint, then it would, one of the, the benefits that was talked early on was the programmatic changes that could happen in terms of strengthening the programs by having more kids in them. Just off the top of my head, I see that as possibly being an issue there as far as the savings where, some of those programs would still stay separate, but you couldn't have them as strong because there's fewer kids in the one school, that's on the one school. So I think that we would have to take a look at that, Kelly, to see, kind of where those changes were. I think operationally, that's going to be what it's going to be. Any other of the staffing issues will probably be what it's going to be. The teaching, we would have to take a look at that, and just in terms of kind of who's teaching what and what programs can then be strengthened or not.
Thank you. Yeah, Angie?
So Philip, do you have much experience in combining 2 schools? Like, this is a close, like small community. I was kind of envisioning, and correct me if I'm wrong, the idea like consolidating or combining 2 schools. And, I don't know what that looks like as far as, I'm just learning the differences in deciphering, between the 2. As far as, I don't think, I've had personal experience with schools where they have two different programs and there kind of becomes this like us versus them mentality, and it kind of creates more of a divide. Is there smooth ways to maybe combine, but I don't know if you talk about changing a mascot. I know schools have done that before. How do you kind of satisfy all parties involved so that you don't have a huge drop-off rate? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think I understand. I do understand your question. I'm probably not the best person to ask in that. That's probably a little bit outside of my expertise. Because programmatically and curriculum-wise, I probably can't advise that well. It's not really kind of in my wheelhouse. Facilities-wise, how to create two campuses at one campus, we've worked on quite a bit. Well, not quite a bit when it occurs, and that is, you try to blend the two physically, if you will, and it's difficult to do because you are trying to maintain these identities. Because as you just said a moment ago, if it's constantly separated, then it is an us and them situation, and that's. I think probably everybody on this Zoom meeting right now could probably speak to that better than I am. You're educators much more than I am. And that isn't the kind of atmosphere you're necessarily trying to create, while at the same time you're trying to have them maintain their identity as being maybe the Annalise students maybe, or you're at the Laguna. That's a smaller program. It's a different program. Is that going to be housed somewhere else? How would that look? That could create probably that kind of separation you're talking about, and we're probably trying to find a way to not let that happen. I wish I had a better answer, but I'm on the curriculum and on the educational side, I don't have as much experience than on the facility side.
Thank you.
Jeannie looks like she stepped away for a second. So Diane?
No, I'm here.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Diane.
Okay, so I have two things. So Angie, I was a little confused for a while, not by your question so much, but by the different answers. So you weren't asking about two different programs, one for El Molino, one for Annalee at one site. Weren't you talking about how to blend El Molino and Annalee students to become unite, to be in one school together? Okay, okay. Thanks for asking that. I really appreciate it. My question is, and I don't know how to say my question, so I'm going to say different things. Who does the land at each site belong to? Would the funds generated by the sale, lease, etc., whatever, if we get some money out of it, of that site be state or non-state funds? And what is the difference between state and non-state funds?
I can answer a part of that. We did confirm that with the SAB and through some investigation that none of that's bad English. Our property was not procured through state funds. So we would not be required to return any money to the state. So the current requirement is if you procure land with state funding, when you go to sell or dispose of that property, they are going to want their piece of the pie back. And that is not an issue with any of our properties.
Thank you.
I think Phil could answer the second part of it.
That it's your money? It is absolutely your money. And even if the SAB wanted to try to take some, we would demand a waiver. I'd file an appeal. No, we would
Okay.
fight to make sure you kept your money anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions from the board? Okay, so I guess Jenny said, yes, Kelly, go ahead.
I just have a point of clarification kind of to Angie's point, because I think it was a really good one that you brought up around sort of this idea of if we do combine schools, just to be really clear, if we did, you could create a new identity for that school. So it could be, you know, you wouldn't necessarily be looking at El Molino or Annalee, like it could be something new. And are there legal Like, what is that, just a board decision? Is there a process you have to go through to make that happen, to create this new identity? Because we're still staying the board, we're just basically sort of creating a new school. What does that look like?
It's a process of CDS codes with CDE, changing of the school name. We'd need a new code. I think it's paperwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a board decision
Yep.
with plenty of community input.
Well, exactly. I mean, there would be a process, but just what does that look like? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to hear from the alumni. You will hear from the alumni, from both.
Yeah, Ted.
I wanted to thank Phil for his comment and his candor tonight. I like the part where you talked about getting people to sign up to be on a bond oversight committee. We have that problem. Everyone votes for the bond, they pass it. We build a performing arts center, but no one wants to be on the oversight committee. And I like your comments about the 7-11 committee. It's one thing about schools, we have so much input. We get it again and again and again. I know this is a comment, but I just want to say it. It's ad nauseum. So I think we stick to our agenda, our facts, our community input, and whatever the board decides what community input, we move on one way or another. So thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.
Okay, I guess, Jenny, you said there was one more slide?
Correct. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
It's next steps. And I've mentioned these a couple times tonight, but this is the official last slide. So there are really 2 decisions, as I mentioned before, that the board needs to make. And the first decision is whether or not the board wants to combine schools. So that's the first decision. And then once that decision is made, there could be another series of input sessions to decide where the location of that school would be if they are combined. So in order to make those decisions, we've established future meetings. So our next meeting is actually a week from tonight, and this item will be part of the board agenda. There are other items on the agenda, but we have allocated time to continue this discussion and answer some of the questions. There's a town hall meeting on October 21st that's completely devoted to this topic. Another town hall meeting on November the 4th, which is also completely devoted to this topic. And then we have 3 additional board meetings that are happening before the end of this calendar year, which are also opportunities to have that same conversation. So lots of places for public comment and input into this decision.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. So with that, I think we're going to call this meeting adjourned. And I want to say thank you so much to all of our presenters for your information. It's a wealth of information that we've received and a wealth of knowledge behind all that. So thank you very much for bringing your expertise, because I think that's really important to us right now. And then I also want to thank all of our participants very much, our members of the public who have been in attendance, and those of you that have hung on throughout this pushing 3 hours. I really appreciate it. And definitely we will see you all again next week at our board meeting. And I know there was a question about this meeting not having been posted, or person said they didn't hear about it soon enough. It's been out there and about for quite some time. It actually was in the paper. It was on KSR radio. It was went home to parents in information. It's we really tried our absolute best to get the word out. So we will continue to do that with the upcoming town hall meetings so that more people can be involved. So thank you very much. And with that, I say good night. Diane.
One really quick thing. If all the people who came to the meeting, the members of the public, teachers, parents, can contact 5 people that they know to tell them that this is going on or something like that. It doesn't have to be 5, to get the word out there. We do our best.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. We do our best, but we could certainly use help. So spread the word for us, please. Thank you. All right. Thank you all very much and good night. And we'll see you next week at our regularly scheduled board meeting.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. I'm going to hang tight and make sure everything gets saved correctly.
Night.